Hello everybody, David here, continuing my series of in-depth yo-yo reviews. This time we'll be going over the Turning Point Palpitation ES. My goal for this series of reviews is to provide very concrete positives and negatives about a yo-yo and say who I think should buy it. Because there's a problem with yo-yo reviews right now where the positives and negatives of a yo-yo will not be gone over properly, and yo-yos could just be vaguely praised and you won't get enough information as a consumer. I will also provide comparisons with the other Turning Point yo-yos that use the exact palpitation profile and what is different and if I think this is worth it for you. The first thing I will cover are the specs and construction quality of this yo-yo. The diameter is 56 millimeters, very standard, and the width is 42.5, by modern standards on the narrow side. The weight is 66.6 grams, very close to the original Palpitation's weight. The gap width, etc. are not provided by Maptrick at this moment, but I would assume that the gap is pretty wide considering by how this plays. More on that later. For the internals, this yo-yo uses a standard size C center track bearing. It's just a default center track. Some of the more expensive Turning Point yo-yos I've had recently have had very dialed in bearings, but it was not quite the case for this yo-yo. It just felt like another bulk yo-yo factory bearing. It makes sense because I'll talk about value more later, but this yo-yo was a little under $150, which is on the cheaper end for a Turning Point bimetal, especially something based on something so legendary and something that's a full-size competition signature yo-yo. For the pads, Turning Point, they used to be using these black pads, which are grippier and really nice, but these are also just like standard yo-yo factory quality white pads. I mean, they get the job done, but you're definitely not getting that premium experience from the internals. It also has a 10 millimeter axle, and this is a 6061 aluminum yo-yo. So Turning Point used to use longer axles for durability reasons as well as adding more center weight, but this has really reduced it from what the old made in Japan style bimetals had, often 15 millimeter axles, which is just crazy now, into 10 millimeters, which is standard for this kind of yo-yo. And also, for commenting on the axle, for some other nice SIGs like the MSG, they were using the tie center lock axle, which actually I thought it'd be placebo, noticeably makes yo-yos smoother. So them neglecting to add that is just another reason that this yo-yo has a slightly lower price than their other signature bimetals. Okay, as for the machining quality of this yo-yo, for Turning Point in general, they've been amazing in that aspect, especially since they've switched their machining to Chinese shops. So I can't comment on the finish for this yo-yo in particular because all I could get my hands on is a raw one. But here I'll show you another recent Turning Point Hinamosu, which has just an amazing blast and anodization on it. And I'm sure that if you got an anodized Palpitation ES, it would have a similar quality in that regard. For the machining itself, Turning Point yo-yos are very durable. Ring dislodgement for a Turning Point bimetal is basically unheard of. And for smoothness factor for this yo-yo, I can say it's pretty much dead smooth and would pass as an A grade for just about any company, though this is just for a single yo-yo out of the run, and it can be kind of random and luck-based what you get, but I will say it's not the smoothest bimetal I've ever played. There is some hair of detectable vibe, though it's really not anything at all. Definitely far from what you can possibly show on camera with that sort of thing. But I'll just say I have played smoother bimetals from Turning Point, such as my MSG, because of the titanium center lock axle. It manages to make the yo-yo ever so slightly smoother, though it's not really even an improvement worth chasing. And if you get a bimetal this smooth from any company, you have absolutely nothing to complain about. Okay, and now for the on the string portion of this yo-yo review. So I'll say straight off the bat that this is a yo-yo that plays great, and for certain types of player, this is like one of the best bimetals you could get for sure. Now, this yo-yo is stability oriented, so it has crazy power, crazy spin time, and that is what Turning Point in general is known for. But there are also yo-yos made like that by other brands, such as the Unparalleled Cognition. And there's often downsides to having this crazy stability, even though it will make your tricks easier. But this is offset by two factors with the design of this kind of Turning Point yo-yo, which are the large amount of center weight as well as the narrow width. So having an increase in center weight compared to what most modern yo-yo designers will do just makes the yo-yo feel more present and less pleasant and less bricky on the string, and it increases maneuverability, allows for more redirects. Even though with a certain weight, if you increase the center weight and reduce rim weight, you will suffer from like some reduction in stability. But with this yo-yo, it's definitely not pushed too far. As well as the narrow width. 42.5 is definitely less than like I think what most players go for these days. But if you reduce the width like that, the yo-yo can have just better play properties in terms of its power on the string and stuff like that. And I think the reduced width is not necessarily a problem either because of the type of trick this yo-yo is meant for. This yo-yo is definitely meant for the tech player. You know, this is great for learning tricks and doing like Takeshi style tech. When it comes to these tech style yo-yos though, I think this is basically the ultimate one. This shape has gotten so much refinement in its weight distribution over the years by Kentaro because this profile is very close to the Positron, which is a yo-yo that released in around 2010. And that extreme refinement in weight distribution of finding like the just right point has allowed this yo-yo to have, I'd say, a straight up godlike combination of power without becoming overwhelming or losing maneuverability. Don't get me wrong, this yo-yo is a lot on the string. There's like no float to it at all. But compared to other yo-yos that will give you like this level of power, this yo-yo is way more maneuverable. So like even though it's like a tech-oriented yo-yo, you can still do like some amount of like speed tricks or like horizontal if you really wanted to, even though it's not necessarily the best for those kind of tricks, also because of the catch zone, it still has like that option. If you're like a tech-focused player and you still want to be able to do like every trick well, then this is like the best choice of yo-yo. So yeah, this yo-yo is tech player's dream, but it still has some level of versatility, which that's kind of how the original Palpitation was. Like you could see like Connor Seals on stage do some crazy horizontal stuff, zoning on the OG Palp, even though it wasn't really designed with that in mind because of its versatility. And this yo-yo has pushed that even further, even if it's lost like just some hair of power compared to the original. But there is something that might be a significant drawback to a lot of people, and it's the gap. Now, Turning Point's always been known for their wide gaps. For example, the Mustang's gap is over 5 millimeters. I can't tell you what the gap is on this, but it plays pretty wide. It plays about as wide as any yo-yo I've ever played, and it could make the yo-yo kind of slippy. Like if you're using super thin string, it's actually a problem, but if you use like average, I think it's still fine. And there's even some upsides to that because it allows you to handle more string layers. Like this yo-yo can handle such a ridiculous amount of wraps. Like, you see that? That's crazy. But it's not necessarily an upside, especially if you're a beginner. You might have some trouble binding. And something I haven't done is try out nicer pads because these are like cheaper pads, I think. But here's the thing, I don't actually like normally to use like, for example, RSO landing pads because they're excessively grippy in most yo-yos. And that's hurting like usability for my tech tricks. But specifically for this yo-yo, it might be a good idea to get a pair of those and try it out. So as a note for 3A and 5A, the gap width does pose a problem for these styles. While this yo-yo on the string and its actual play properties are just absolutely amazing for what you'd want for those styles of play, including the width, power, how it moves, all that. But you also want a yo-yo to be easier to bind in those styles because you're not doing these crazy technical wraps, and especially it can be harder to bind in 3A and 5A, especially 3A, binding with like a super short string and with your offhand. It kind of, in theory, because I don't have a pair and I haven't tested it out. In theory, that would spoil this yo-yo's 3A ability, and that's just something to keep in mind. The Palpitation ES comes from many years of refinement using this exact profile. As you can see here, here's the new and the original compared next to each other. And here's a Hinamosu. All identical. But I'll show you the difference between the original and the new one. And The differences come here. So on the Palpitation ES, the nipple is much smaller and the ring is wider. As you can see in the cup for the original Palpitation goes down to here, but in the ES, the rim is much wider. And these changes just work out amazingly for how this yo-yo plays. The original Palp was amazing for tech tricks, don't get me wrong, but it couldn't quite move right if you're like not really doing those Takeshi tricks. But these revisions, reducing the center weight, which does increase stability, especially increasing ability for like speed, rail, and horizontal, as well as broadening of the steel rim, makes a huge difference. Because there's like all this power coming from this rim, and making it more spread out, basically, this power with this wider ring, somehow it feels more stable yet also more balanced. It's a crazy combination of things how this weight distribution has worked out, and it just comes from how much refinement there's been. I think this is like the best well-rounded tech yo-yo ever, and I would highly suggest picking one up even if you're not a Turning Point fan. And I will add some clarifications because this Palpitation shape has been used so heavily. This is all I own at this point, which is the Palps and the Hinamosu, because I think these are the best ones using the Palp profile. But I've owned them all before, including Mustang, Mustang ES, St. Elmo, and Colony. And I'll just do a quick comparison of the Palp ES to each of those. So compared to the Hinamosu is more powerful. It's maybe the better tech yo-yo actually with these huge rings, but it can be fatiguing to use over long sessions and definitely has less versatility than the Palp ES has in terms of like ability to do horizontal, etc. And the slight advantage you would get in tech from this yo-yo is a good thing to have, but I think it means the Palp ES is overall a better yo-yo. And versus the rest of the Palp profile yo-yos, those honestly play a lot different than these three. These are like kind of heavyweight, power through your trick yo-yos. But Colony, even though it's outer ring, it's actually like quite light on the string and sensitive. Like it's not gonna power through your tricks like that. That's why I think these are just better tech yo-yos than that. St. Elmo and Mustang, they play very similar. I just say a Mustang is a 5% better St. Elmo. And those are more like just to chill out yo-yos. They have less performance in them for sure. And it's more just like, I'm gonna carry this yo-yo around and just have some fun. It's not like performance oriented. Okay, the last thing I'll briefly cover for this yo-yo is the value. So at a retail of slightly under $150 or 22,000 Japanese yen, this yo-yo is a very good price and definitely cheaper than Turning Point traditionally is for a signature, and especially something that's throwing back to a legendary yo-yo. Though I can't say how much of that is the Japanese yen taking a hit recently compared to the US dollar. But regardless, the pricing is very fair, and if you're interested in a good tech yo-yo and you like Takeshi as a player and are interested to try it out, it's definitely worth the money. And I hope they make more.